and welcome to ARTFul Insights. I'm Shane Farrell, the Digital Projects and Programs Manager for ARTZ Philadelphia, and together you and I are going to look at some art today. This video is produced in partnership between Dementia Society of America and ARTZ Philadelphia. Each month we offer a live program where a small group of people talk about a work of art or works of art from museums and cultural centers around the country. It's a different museum or cultural center each month, and in addition to that live program, we also produce a video like the one you're watching right now. We look at the same works of art as we did in the live group, but with the video it's 30 to 40 minutes in length. You can watch it anytime, day or night, that might suit you. And it's an opportunity to have a more intimate, self-driven conversation about the art. I'll ask a few questions to get us started, give you a few things to think about. I'll share some of the observations and thoughts that folks from the live group brought up that I think might be interesting for you to consider. But really, this video each month is about you. It's about what you see in these works of art, how you respond to them, and just having the opportunity to look at a work of art and think about it at your own pace. If you're watching this video with someone, please feel free to pause from time to time if you'd like, so that you can have your own conversation. If you're watching on your own, we're delighted to have you, and it'll be a conversation just between the two of us. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the museum or cultural center that we're visiting today. Welcome to ARTFul Insights. So, here we are at the museum we're going to be visiting today. This is the Crystal Bridges Museum. It's located in Bentonville, Arkansas. The museum's run as a public nonprofit charitable organization, and admission is always free. So if you ever find yourself in Bentonville, Arkansas, it's a bit of a ways from the major cities, but you'll be able to go and visit the Crystal Bridges Museum for free. The collection at the Crystal Bridges Museum is focused on American art. They describe themselves as trying to capture the American spirit in a setting that unites the power of art with the beauty of nature. They have work spanning 5 centuries of American artworks from early America to the present. And to talk a little bit about the nature part, I'm going to show you a different picture. It's a little pixely, but you can see that there's a very unique design to the building here, and you might start to get an idea of why this museum is called the Crystal Bridges Museum. The museum takes its name both from a local natural spring and from the bridge structures that you can see here in this image. So you'll notice these 2 bridges that are going over top of this body of water that the museum kind of surrounds on all sides. In addition to the structure of the museum that we see here, the indoor areas, there's also outdoor hiking areas, outdoor sculptures, and just a lot of space to explore. The Crystal Bridges Museum aims to tell broad and inclusive stories by acquiring and showcasing artworks by artists that are underrepresented in art history and in traditional museum frameworks. It was founded by Alice Walton and opened in November of 2011. So it's a relatively new museum. As you can see, it's a pretty unique looking museum. And now that we know a little bit about it, why don't we take a look at the artwork that we're going to look at today? So here's the artwork that we're going to be looking at today. And before I ask any questions or say anything about this artwork, I want to give you a chance to just look it over, See what catches your eye, notice whatever you notice first. Spend a little bit of time with it. There's a good bit going on in this artwork, so just take your time and see what draws you in about it and what questions you have, what observations you have, anything you pick up on in this painting I would love to hear about. So now that you've had a chance to look this over, what were some of the first things you noticed about it? I'd love to hear what your first observations were. One of the first things that catches my eye about this painting is the color. Is there anything in particular that you noticed about the color in this painting? Was there a particular color that drew you in, or a relationship between colors that was interesting to you? Well, there are two things that catch my eye first and foremost. Maybe you noticed something different, but let's zoom in on the painting a little bit and talk about color. So first I noticed up here toward the top of the painting that there's this very deep, intense blue color. Does that blue bring anything to mind for you? What do we think it might be representing? This kind of deep, rich blue color that we see here. And as we move slightly down the painting, you notice that the blue gets a little bit lighter from top to bottom. What do we think that might be telling us? What's going on here that at the very top of the painting we see this very deep, almost dark blue, and toward the bottom we see this much lighter blue color. Let's come back to that in a second. There's another thing I noticed first and foremost that I want to see if maybe you noticed as well. The other primary color that I pick up on here is yellow. Did this yellow draw your attention right away as well? It certainly drew my attention. There's a lot of yellow actually going on in this piece. Where do you see yellow first? Yellow, orange, maybe gold, maybe you would use a different word to describe the color that we're seeing here. Something in that general kind of warm tone, yellowish, goldish, orangish range. There's a lot of yellow in these circular objects that we're seeing in the painting here. You can see quite a few of them kind of dappled throughout the painting. Up here, behind what looks like it might be some leaves. Over here, down here, down here. You get the idea. There's quite a few of them, right? So we see these kind of brightly gold, orange, yellow objects that really draw our attention. But do you notice yellow anywhere else as you look a little closer? Let's zoom in a bit on the figures in this painting. So as we look a bit closer, is there somewhere else that you're noticing a yellowish or goldish color? Well, I'm noticing it a bit in the clothing of the figures we're seeing here. So the first thing to catch our eye, or at least catch my eye certainly, was these kind of circular objects that are bright yellow. But if we look at the clothes of the figures, they're kind of a funny shade of yellow also, aren't they? It's perhaps a little more complicated than that. Maybe you would describe the color in a different way, but we get the sense that they're kind of bathed in yellow light. Do you get that sense looking at them? To me, it looks like kind of yellow light in shadow. And if we go in even closer, here we are really close, we can see it's kind of maybe more of a brownish color, kind of burlap looking kind of color. But to me, that looks like the color of someone being bathed in yellow-orange light, but they're also a bit in shadow. Does it look that way to you, or does it look like something different? And while we're on the subject of light, why don't we zoom back out? And now let's kind of bring together our discussion about color here. So when we were talking about blue, we talked about a darker blue at the top, a lighter blue toward the kind of middle of the painting. We talked about this bright yellow that really draws our attention in all these circular objects around the painting. Then we talked about the way the figures are lit in this painting, which to me kind of looks like these yellow objects are lighting them somehow, like they're bathed in yellow light. And then there's also a few other things going on, right? There's a color up top here in these areas. It's maybe a bit more greenish, much darker. Looks like that might be a tree of some sort. And then we have kind of dark color on the surface that our figures are on here. It's kind of a brownish, grayish, perhaps. What would you name that color? So we've got all these different colors here that are kind of creating a sense of light for us. Does that give you an idea of maybe what time of day it might be when we're looking at this? In particular, looking at the background with the dark blue to the light blue, does that bring to mind a particular time of day? Well, one of our participants in our online group discussion said that they thought it was kind of dusk, like sunset time. So that would make sense why we're seeing dark blue higher up in the sky and light blue more toward the horizon, because maybe the sun is just finished setting. So we're just starting to see daytime and nighttime kind of meet in the middle there. Do you agree that this might be kind of at the beginning of nighttime? And also that kind of brings up the question, we've talked a lot about color and about kind of things that give us hints about the scene but aren't just talking about what we're looking at. So what are we looking at? What are these yellow, bright, circular objects that we're seeing here? And how does that affect our sense of the time of day and also the light in this work? Well, we had a couple different answers in our online group discussion. One of our Group members said they look kind of like bouncy balls, like something that a kid might play with and throw around in their backyard. But most people eventually decided that they thought these were lanterns of some sort. Do you agree with that? Do you think these might be some kind of lantern? And if so, what are we seeing here? It's dusk. We see all these figures holding a bunch of lanterns, and perhaps we look up top here. They're hanging the lanterns maybe in this tree. We see one back here that looks like it might already be hung up. We see two more up in this corner here. Do you agree these might be lights of some sort? That would also make sense with the sense of light that we talked about before, right? These characters kind of look like they're bathed in a yellowy, orangey, gold-colored light. So maybe these are some kind of lights, lanterns of some sort. Why would these figures be hanging a bunch of lanterns in this tree? Does this remind us of anything in particular? Have you seen a similar scene anywhere in your life, or perhaps in a story you heard once? I don't think I've ever personally seen anything like this. It's got kind of a fantastical feeling to it, doesn't it? It's not just an everyday scene that you might see anywhere. Or maybe it is. Maybe this is something you see every day outside of your front door. But let's come back to the question of what do we think is going on here? What other clues can we use to think about what's happening here? What else is there that gives us a hint of what we're looking at? Well, one thing a lot of participants in our online group discussion talked about was the clothing that all the figures are wearing. So let's zoom in on them a bit again and talk about their clothing. So, what do we notice about the clothes of all these figures? Is there something that catches your eye first and foremost? Well, one thing someone in our group discussion noticed right away is that they're all dressed very similarly. Even their hair is similar. They almost look sort of like the same person. So there's some kind of uniform going on here between all of these characters. Another thing one of our participants noticed in our group discussion was their hats. Did the hats catch your eye as well? Kind of unique, aren't they? A participant in our group discussion said they reminded her of ice cream cones. And they are kind of ice cream cone shaped, aren't they? They come to a bit of a point at the top, and they have kind of a conical structure to them. It's not a shape you see too often in hats people wear in everyday life. Another participant noticed if we look at the collars on all of their clothing, they're very ruffled. There's kind of a ruffled collar here on each of these figures. And in addition to the ruffled collar, they have these kind of pom-pom buttons running up and down their jackets, and also on their hats. And it looks like maybe on their pants as well, if we look at this figure up here. This is a very interesting outfit we have going on here. All these people are dressed identically. There are pom-poms and ruffles on their outfits. They are wearing these kind of conical hats. Does this make us think of anything in particular? Why do we think they're all dressed the same? And what do their clothes indicate to us about them? One participant in the group discussion said they're dressing up. It looks like they're wearing costumes. Maybe this is a costume of some sort, which would give us another hint about what might be going on in this scene. Perhaps there's some kind of celebration going on where people dress up in costume. Another participant said, they look like clown outfits to me. They could be used at Halloween. So maybe this kind of looks like a bunch of clowns. Another participant kind of disagreed. She said, I think about clowns with funny noses and big shoes. These ones don't look like that. So that's interesting. To one person, these look like clowns. To another, they don't really fit their archetype of what a clown is. Do these look like clowns to you? Do they look like something else? Do you have some sort of familiarity with this costume, or does it feel kind of foreign to you? Well, when we get to the end of our discussion, I'll talk a little bit about this clothing and what it might mean. But for now, let's just kind of ponder the question. Why are they dressed this way? What does this indicate? And what kind of people might these be? Are they clowns? Are they celebrating something? Why are they all dressed the same? Now let's take a quick second to just kind of look at what they're doing and look at their expressions, because maybe that'll tell us something about this painting. I'm going to just move upward a little bit so we can see as many of their faces as possible. Is there a face that you focus on first? And is there something the expressions here indicate to you? Is there something about their body language? Anything that gives you a hint of how they're feeling or what they're up to? Do they look like they're very engaged with each other? Or do they look kind of like each of them is just doing their own thing? Well, one of the participants in our group discussion said, look at this figure here. And I'll zoom in a little bit. He's smiling. They're having fun. They're having a good time together. And it's true, this figure is smiling here. So maybe what they're doing here is fun for them. Do you get a sense that something fun is happening here? As we look at some of the other expressions, what do we see? Well, that one figure is smiling. The rest of them, not as much. Figure over here is kind of looking up and to the side. They look like maybe they're a little impatient or something like that. This figure here is hunched over. And what does their expression indicate to you? And their posture. Posture can tell us a lot as well. To me, it kind of looks like they're listening very intently. They're hunched over. They're trying to hear what someone's saying, and they have this kind of focused expression. Do you agree with that? This figure over here kind of looks like maybe their eyes are just pointing toward what they're doing. They've got something between their fingertips over here, and below that we can see this big lantern, if we agree it's a lantern. So maybe they're just focused on their task at hand. They're just hanging up that lantern. Would you agree with that, or do you think they're doing something different? And then at the bottom here, this character's glance, where is that pointing us? To me, it kind of looks like they're looking down. Again, kind of looking down at what they're doing. Their hand is kind of clasped right here beneath the lantern. Their other hand is kind of clasped at maybe what might be a string at the top of the lantern. So again, they look like they're kind of focused on the task at hand. And the character that we talked about that was smiling kind of looks like their glance goes down toward this figure in the corner that we were just talking about. But while the figure that's smiling looks like they're looking at that person looks like they're looking at what they're doing. So there doesn't look like there's a lot of direct interaction between all of these figures. They're doing something together. But even the figures like the smiling figure who are looking at another figure, their glance isn't being met. So there's something interesting about that. Why do we think all these people gathered together, and while some of them are looking at others, none of them are seeming to engage directly with each other? Maybe they're just very focused on what they're doing. What do you think? Why is that when we look at where all the characters are looking, they aren't meeting each other's glances? Well, now that we've talked a bit about how these figures are interacting with each other, why don't we zoom out a little bit and just ask some kind of personal reflection questions on this painting. Something we always like to ask in our group discussions is, would you want this painting hanging in your room? You can start kind of a fun discussion about what we like, what we don't like, what draws us in and what repels us. So what do you think? Would you like to have this painting hanging somewhere in your house? One of our participants in our group discussion said, yes, it's nice. Another said, it looks like a fun painting. I would hang it here in my apartment. And so that kind of brings up an interesting question, which is, how does the painting make us feel? Is there something about the color, about the activity we're seeing here, that makes us feel a certain way? Is there a reason we might want to hang this in our homes? Or at least maybe you don't want this anywhere near your home, but our participants in our group discussion seem to be fond of it. Is there a particular feeling that this evokes that might make us feel a fondness toward it? To me, the sense of light in this painting makes it feel very warm, a little bit dreamy, right? At the time between sunset and dusk, when it's not quite dark yet, There's something nice about that time of day and about that feeling. Would you agree? Well, one of our participants in the group had an interesting answer to how this painting made her feel. And she said, "It makes me feel like I'm aging. Everyone seems like they're rushing around. There's a lot of movement and footwork." So she felt a bit rushed by this painting. Do you get that sensation at all? Do you feel rushed by this? Or do you feel more at peace and like you're moving at a slow rate? There seemed to be a bit of disagreement in our group about whether this painting felt fast or slow. People had different ideas about that, so I would love to hear what your ideas are. And while we're talking about speed, let's talk about something else we like to talk about a lot, which is sound. And it might sound like kind of a strange question, but I want to ask what this piece sounds like to you. So if you were here, if you imagine you are wherever these figures are, what would you be hearing around you? Would it be loud? Would it be quiet? Would there be sounds up close or sounds in the distance? What do you think you would hear? Well, one of our participants in the group discussion said, if there are any noises at all, they're very soft sounds. There's a sense of quiet in this painting. Do you agree with that? Do you think this is very quiet? There is something about this time of day that feels a little quiet sometimes, right? Like the world quiets down a little when the sun goes down. But we also see that there's 6 figures here. Usually, we don't describe scenes with a lot of people as quiet. Do you think there's a particular reason we might be thinking that these figures are quiet? Maybe connected to what they're doing, maybe connected to the way they're dressed? Or do you disagree? Do you think they're talking and laughing and having a great time, just being loud while they hang up these lanterns? It's an interesting question, and maybe it can tell us something about who these figures are and what they're doing. Well, as we start to wrap up our discussion here, I want to ask a final question that I ask a lot if you've watched some of the other videos, but I always think they're interesting answers. That question is, what would you title this? Is there a title you would come up with that would kind of summarize some of your thoughts about this work of art? Well, one of our participants in the group discussion said, beautiful and dreamy. I think that's a nice answer. There is something kind of dreamy about this painting, isn't there? Something kind of fantastical about it. We've got these interesting costumes. We've got this very dramatic sense of light. And just kind of an unusual scene here. So maybe there's something dreamlike about it. What would you title this piece? Well, the actual title of this piece is The Lantern Bearers. It's a painting by Maxfield Parrish, who was actually born in Philadelphia, so if you're local, maybe you've heard of him before. was painted in 1908. It's 40 by 32 inches, and it's oil on canvas. So one of the very first things we talked about in this painting was the very deep blue in the background. And actually, Parrish was so well known for using this shade of blue that they call it Parrish blue. And there's actually a painting at the Free Library of Philadelphia in the Rare Books department by Maxfield Parrish that uses a lot of this blue. And I used to work at the library. I spent a lot of time looking at the very vibrant blue in that painting. So I think maybe that's part of why I was drawn to the blue in this painting right away. If you have a chance to see that in person, I highly recommend it. The blue really is a very vibrant, interesting color. So to talk a little bit about the costumes that the characters are wearing here, these are known as Pierrot costumes, which was kind of an archetype of a pantomime or clown character in French culture. So this was kind of a boilerplate sort of costume for a pantomime or clown-like character. And maybe that also connects to why we felt like this scene was so quiet. Pantomime, also known as miming, people moving around in total silence, giving the impression that, maybe the famous one is they're stuck in a glass box, but that they're interacting with objects that the rest of us can't see. So maybe this is silent because we're looking at a group of mimes, and the way they're dressed does kind of indicate that to us. So it's interesting as we kind of learn details about a painting, the artist, its history, we can learn a little bit more about the story of what might be happening here. So before we go, I just want to give a big thanks to the Crystal Bridges Museum, particularly Kim Crowell and Libby Hillard, without whom this program would not have been possible. We were very pleased to be able to look at some work from their collection, and we want to thank them so much for having us. I also want to thank you for joining me in this discussion. I hope it was interesting. I hope it generated some fun ideas for you and just helped you engage your imagination. I hope that if you enjoyed this video, that you might join us for one of our group discussions that happen online. If you go to artsphilly.org, that's arts with a Z, and go to our event calendar, you'll see all of our upcoming events, and maybe you can join one and have a conversation that's between a whole bunch of people rather than you, me, and whoever you might be watching with. So thanks again for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion today. I'm Shane Farrell. I'm the Digital Projects and Programs Manager for ARTZ Philadelphia, and this has been another episode of ARTFul Insights.